It's showtime.
Hey everyone, Django Fett here, hunting down games, comics, TV shows, movies, and more, and this is a review for At War with the Empire Volume 2. So let's read the publisher's summary, then get into each of the stories, spoiler-free as much as possible. The struggling rebellion has won their first major victory by destroying the Death Star, but the war against the Empire has just begun. Farm boy turned hero Luke Skywalker gets his first inkling of what it once meant to be a Jedi. Luke and Princess Leia encounter a society that blames its plight on the Clone Wars traitor Anakin Skywalker. A powerful crime lord leads the Empire, the rebels, and his own spies in a circle of betrayal. Darth Vader lures Luke, Leia, and Han to a desolate moon for an encounter with the Sith power from ancient times. So the Omnibus came out in late 2011 and contains Empire comic issues number 26 to 27, 29 to 30, 32 to 35, and Rebellion comic issues number 6 to 16, and a Valentine story comic. The Valentine story was a short story that came out in February where Han Solo and Leia are trapped on this world, and it's pretty short and a sweet story, so I won't address it later on. But the Rebellion comics, however, are pretty much the continuation of the Empire comics after that ended, and eventually Rebellion was cancelled after 16 issues to make way for the Invasion comic series, which deals with the Yuzhong Vong War. And I'll touch upon Invasion one of these days later on. And that sucks, man. I love the Rebellion comics, and it felt like it ended abruptly, and you'll see what I mean when I get to that series. Now, this omnibus contains 7 stories, so let's get into each of these stories, starting with General Skywalker. So General Skywalker is set 7 months after the Battle of Yavin and is written by Ron Mars and drawn by Adriana Mello and Nicola Scott. In this story, Luke is an escort for a rebel group, and when they run into an unexpected Imperial patrol there, they're forced to fight with them, and they also run into an old-school clone trooper, codenamed Abel, who thinks the rebels are the bad guys and the Imperials are the good guys at first, then finds out it's actually the opposite and ends up saving and joining the rebels altogether. A pretty short story, but this is the first time you see a clone trooper joining the rebels, and eventually Dave Filoni ripping off the idea completely and consistently ripping off EU elements. Do you see why I hate Filoni and will never touch his garbage? Abel would end up being a pretty cool character in a few other stories like in the Rebellion comics, but really not utilized to his fullest due to the short lifespan of the EU after this comic. A Model Officer is the next story, and it's set 8 months after the Battle of Yavin and is written by John Jackson Miller and drawn by Brian Ching. So right there, it's pretty cool seeing the original Knights of the Old Republic duo doing a short one-issue Empire story. So Darth Vader is on the hunt for the rebel fleet, and after a zealous flare of his own Imperials destroying the rebels at various locations, after asking the Imperials to do no such thing, he begins a manhunt. Pretty short, good story that has its cool twists, and it's great to see the incredible artwork by Brian Ching. In the Shadows of Their Fathers is set 8 months after the Battle of Yavin and is written by Thomas Andrews, aka Jeremy Barlow, and is drawn by Adriana Mello and Michael Lacombe. This is a good one and something I want to talk about more because this is an Empire story that deals with Jabim. Yeah, that Jabim. That deals with my favorite Clone Wars story ever, Last Stand of Jabim. Now, if you remember what happens after the end of that story, Anakin is forced to flee the planet and leave the Jabimis behind, and they're forced to deal with the conflict on their own. And from then, they have hated and cursed Anakin Skywalker's name since. But when Luke and Leia arrive, decades later, to an overmined Jabim that is stripped by its ore and is practically a desert world instead of the constant rain before, they're welcome initially, but when Luke reveals his last name, that's when things get heated. Also, Vader is in the story, and let's just say he has a new image of Jabim now. I love this story, and easily my favorite story of this whole omnibus by far. And the fact that we even get a story dealing with Anakin's worst point in the Clone Wars and having the children of Vader and Jabimis with Nolan save the Skywalker image from the mess he caused. And I had to check, and Nolan was indeed in the Jabim conflict. And his father was the guy who punched Anakin in the face and was force choked. I mean, this is why I love Dark Horse, man. They know how to construct these stories, and they pay respect to their older stories. And also on a side note, Leia and Nera Danto's looking fine as hell. I have to admit, I don't know Nira as I think she's more of an older Rogue Squadron comic creation, which I've not really dived into those comics at all. Maybe one of these days I will. Anyway, the next is the Kista Gambit, and it's set 9 months after the Battle of Yavin, and is written by Brandon Bardeau and Rob Williams, and drawn by Michael Lacombe. A rebel by the name of Wild Tarson is found out by a criminal network he works in after sending information to the rebellion, and the network owned by Reyes plants a bug in his head set to explode if he doesn't do what he asks. He tells Wild to acquire something from the planet Akista and bring it back to him. So Wild gathers a crew in order to achieve this objective. There is deception and betrayal, and Vader and others are involved as well. Just a really good story, and Wild is really interesting character, and they show glimpses of this memory he has of his brother strewn throughout the story, and it was very effective storytelling. It made you really feel for the character and how he really owes the rebellion. I do wish there was more with Wild after this story, but unfortunately he is featured in the beginning of Rebellion and the Vector arc, and never seen again. It did feel a little odd in the beginning with Anakin in the temple killing the Jedi, and one Jedi grabs him and tells him about betrayal, and while it is really relevant to the story, I just felt it was out of place for me. Small Victories is the next story, and it's set 9 months after the Battle of Yavin, and is written by Jeremy Barlow and drawn by Colin Wilson. When a hyperdrive failure strands the flagship of the Rebel fleet deep inside Imperial territory, Luke and Leia decide to take the chance and strike at their hated enemy. This story follows Luke and Leia, but this is really Dina Shawn's story, who is a badass commando, fighting alongside Luke to fulfill her mission at all costs. She really transformed from a naive girl that we knew from the first volume to a now commando, which is really cool. There will be another Rebellion story in The Other Sons of Tatooine, which is my next review, showing how she transformed into that, because this story is the tail end of the Rebellion series. It's a really good story, but I felt the artwork was not that great with the faces and just not looking so great and messed up in the art itself. And the last story, not counting Valentine's story, is Vector for the Rebellion arc. So Vader would end up luring the rebels into a trap where Celeste Morn from the Vector storyline and the Moore Talisman are. Most of the rebels would get decimated, unfortunately, and they would flee with Celeste going to an Imperial ship to float out there until the final Legacy arc, and the rebels just fleeing altogether. I've always liked the Vector storyline, and it does make sense to include this story into the Omnibus, but in my opinion, I have a certain inkling to include Vector separate from the Omnibus stories, as I feel it flows better just to read the entire Vector arc by itself. But it's good, it definitely hints at Luke and Leia's powers and their future in general. And unfortunately, this is how the Rebellion series ends. So abruptly, with Vector. I just feel like they could have done so much more if not the EU no longer being considered canon. There was just so much potential with this series, much like Dark Times. And once again, like my previous At War with the Empire Volume 1 review, there really isn't any bad stories here, minus some bad artwork with the Small Victory story. You do get less stories, but longer and more quality-filled stories worth reading over and over again. So I'm giving Star Wars At War with the Empire Volume 2 a great continuation of the series. There are some things left out, as it doesn't contain the end of the Empire series or beginning of the Rebellion series, but they did that because it will continue in The Other Sons of Tatooine, so you may be confused when reading At War with the Empire Volume 2. Pretty much just read At War with the Empire Volume 1, Volume 2, then The Other Sons of Tatooine. And I recommend you check out my review for At War with Volume 1 and look out for my review for The Other Sons of Tatooine. On a side note, for some reason the cover has this ugly banner on the side saying Tales of the Rebellion that take place between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. This was completely unnecessary. I don't know if every cover of this particular omnibus book had this ugly logo, but this was the only omnibus book to have it for the entire omnibus collection. I don't know what they were thinking with that, but it was just really stupid by Dark Horse to do this. This is like the only time I will ever diss Dark Horse ever. And the next review will be The Other Sons of Tatooine Omnibus. And then that will complete my Empire comic series reviews, and who knows what I'll get to next. But more incoming TV show reviews as well. Please be sure to like this video, comment down below, tell me what you think of this particular omnibus if you have it and you've read it before, and subscribe to my channel Django Fett if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.